Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to introduce our second speaker for the morning, Brigadier General retired David Stilwell. I've been told by the General to keep his bio short, so let me just say that he's the Assistant Secretary of State for the Bureau of East Asian and Pacific Affairs, and he served for 35 years in the United States Air Force, with predominantly in the Asia-Pacific region as a linguist, a fighter pilot, and a commander. Sir, the floor is yours.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to come back, and I'm particularly happy to speak into this group here. I've already addressed the Air War College folks here, contingent, in December. I was going to recapitulate that presentation, but luckily Dr. Bada did a good job in her presentation of noting the similarities, actually, between what the authoritarian Chinese and authoritarian Russians, how they view the world. And that chessboard diagram, I thought, also worked very well in helping us understand what we're up against. So I'm not going to hammer that, but I want to go back to the Chernobyl reference. If you haven't seen that documentary, you haven't seen that 5-part series, it is absolutely worth watching, because every neutron that escaped the blown-up nuclear facility equals a virus that escaped from Wuhan due to intent and neglect and incompetence. And it all comes down to, I'm going to ruin it for you, but the punchline is at the last episode, toward the end, the hero is explaining to his Soviet colleagues why the reactor exploded. And they ask him, well, why didn't we know this before? And the answer is because it is all lies. This whole thing you look at, this Soviet system, it's all lies. But every lie incurs a debt to the truth, and sooner or later that debt must be paid. Every neutron that escapes or every virus that escapes, you can't lie that away. So my presentation toward the end, I'm going to show you what these lies with these propaganda techniques look like, and how we can, one, steel ourselves against them and, frankly, use them to embarrass them and undermine legitimacy of communism and Chinese communism. So I want to talk about winning without fighting today. This is what Sun Tzu, talked about 500 BC when he looked at what China had going on, called the Warring States period. And when you talk about warring without fighting, I'm glad you referenced that chessboard diagram. I always thought of it in terms of chess, where you checkmate somebody not by destroying or knocking their piece off the table, but by simply positioning yourself in a position where the other side has no recourse but to follow through and do what you tell them to do. And that's a very military perspective. As Anna said, the Russian approach is very military. The Chinese version, contrary to this picture, is not military. It is economic, it is informational, it's technological, it's all the other things that prevent us from having to have a staring contest and a showdown, which they stand to lose badly in that. No, they're going after this very quiet, subterranean approach that has been working quite well up until about 4 years ago, when we finally recognized it and decided to do something about it. So I want to talk about winning without fighting in broad terms, not in military terms, but in other terms as we go on. This is an interesting, who's been to China? I know the mayor of Tampa has. Who else? I think most of us have experience there. You were shown a China they wanted you to see. Obviously, the real China is what happens when you live there and you get to see the rest. But this is from 2011, back before the advent of Xi Jinping. And this is in an art district in Beijing called 798. And it's a very tongue-in-cheek jab at Chinese Communist Party, about China today, and all these other things, as they were trying to get an aircraft carrier going. This is the out of Ukraine that they ended up buying. But you can see it's all the well-heeled gentlemen and ladies, and there's Mao Zedong, the great helmsman, on the top of this carrier. It is completely cynical, and this is the sort of outlet that Chinese people had prior to 2013, when Xi Jinping named himself, the next heir apparent, and then 2018 when he decided to be president for life. You don't see this anymore. There's no outlet for frustrations in China anymore. And so just keep that in mind. And when you think about this lecture today, I'd like to go bottom line up front. Remember this. You've got the well-heeled and the people with great aspirations for themselves and their single children, problems that creates. And then you've got that giant red edifice out there. And the Mao Zedong aircraft carrier represents the party. The people on the harbor there and walking around the boat are the people. Do not confuse the two. What we do oftentimes is we talk about China as though it's monolithic. It is not. The people are disgusted with the government just as much as we are, but they're in a system where you can't really speak up and say anything about it. So use your language carefully. Talk about the party. Talk about Beijing. Talk about the Chinese government. But when you say China, then they take that and they use it against us in nationalist terms, and it just doesn't work. Slide, please. Next one, I like images, and so not much text in this, a lot of pictures and stuff. The point here is the PRC is reacting to us, and I can't tell you how happy I am about that. For so long, we've been shooting behind the target. We've been taking so long to come up with a solution to one of their programs that we were never really effective. I point to the island building campaign in the South China Sea. They are reacting to us. This is a reaction to us. You can't really read the text there, but I'm lower level, second from the left, along with Mike Pompeo and Matt Pottinger and some other heroes. But, you know, the accusations here on this wanted poster, taken from the Wild West, by the way, is said bad things about the United Front Work Department, or had the gall to travel to Taiwan. Or Kelly Craft, upper row, number 4 from the left, thought about going to Taiwan. We actually canceled her trip. But this is in response to what we've done to the Chinese operatives. How about Chen Quanguo? He is the current governor of Xinjiang. This is the guy who is locking up to 3 million Uyghurs for the crime of being Uyghur. Minority Report stuff, right? These are the people who might commit terrorist acts. And so we're going to fix them in advance by locking them down. So Chen Quanguo, he started his career off in Tibet, where he killed his way to peace. Proof that in Tibet you can't actually kill your way to peace. He did so well they moved him to Xinjiang. We sanctioned him. We started off with visa sanctions to prevent him from ever coming to the U.S. ever again. And he's going, so what? I don't want to go. What about your daughter who wants to go to Harvard? She can't go either. So visa sanctions. And we followed up what we call Global Magnitsky sanctions that actually went after his money. Lots and lots of these Chinese party operatives have investments and huge property holdings in the West and in the U.S. And now we're going after their bottom line and their pocketbook. And I'm so happy that they are reacting to us. Finally, we've got to keep up the momentum. Okay, so the agenda from last time, I don't need to go over this. Anna covered all this stuff in spades. So I'm just basically going to say I covered who China was and what they are. Much of what you heard in the first brief actually speaks to this. So here's what we're going to talk about today. What winning without fighting means. What China means when they say winning without fighting. And defining what winning means. It means prevailing. It doesn't mean, you know, a peace treaty or, you know, beating your enemy into the dirt. And we'll talk about what fighting means. And then, is this a Cold War? A lot of people don't want to think it that. I personally think it is absolutely a Cold War. And until we face that fact, we're going to keep, you know, solving our own problems. And then second part, but here's the point, is how do we win without fighting? How do we speak to them in a language they understand? And how do we prevail in this? I tell you what, for all my folks out in the rooms, it's not what uniform-wearing Tritonol and JP8 folks are doing. It is actually in the information realm and others to get at Chinese Communist Party credibility and other things. Things they pay attention to. A lot of questions on Taiwan these days, so I'm going to take a little coda and we'll just talk quickly about why Taiwan. And then I've got some final thoughts that we can cover real quick. Okay, I said not a lot of words, but here's some words. So what does winning mean in this context? Again, we think of it as you know, killing your enemy or defeating their fielded forces, but it's not that. It's winning means that China gets to name the game. They get to determine the rules. We dance to their tune. The current system, as you know, was established post-World War II by the U.S. and fellow democracies. China doesn't like that because all those rules, although it allowed its rise, don't really support its current worldview and the way it likes to govern. And so they're going to try to change them. And they want to move out of this century of humiliation, where they were very weak, and they want to be not only prevalent and hegemonic in the region, they want to dictate terms in the region, but they also want to have global preeminence. And they're actually saying this very publicly now, so it's not like people can argue this point. I'm just going to point to their literature and say this is exactly what they want to do. Speaking of literature, a pretty good book just came out. It's called Political Warfare. If you're interested in this topic, U.S. Marine Corps University Press printed it, sorry. But if you're interested, take a look at that, and it talks a lot about what I'm going to cover today. Okay, so here's Beijing, the Communist Party's problem. I didn't say China. Here's the party's problem, that this system of government, authoritarianism, was debunked in 1991 with the end of the big Soviet problem and the Cold War. And so now they have to figure out how they can prove themselves and the system to be legitimate. Well, we know that's not possible. This is a heavy lift, because you look at how it operates, and it's might makes right, and you basically bludgeon people into compliance. Well, in the world we're used to today, in the multilateral system that we see in the UN, that doesn't work. So good luck with that. But it doesn't mean they're not going to try, because they've hitched their wagon to this horse, and they have to ride this thing out. Our job is to make them culminate well before they reach their objectives. They talk about socialism with Chinese characteristics. It's all communism. They love Karl Marx. They talk about communism. They know that the word communism hurts our ear. It lands hard after McCarthy and the Soviets and all that stuff. So what this all means is, although you see a lot of talk about the military and all the rest, what it means is that they are going to, and we've gone a long way to undermine democracies, and particularly the U.S., through economic and tech malfeasance. We mentioned this earlier. When the U.S. or how about this? Czech Republic sent 90 of their legislators to Taiwan after China threatened them and said, you can't do it. And they said, we don't care. You know why? Because U.S. leadership sent our Health and Human Services Secretary to Taiwan, proving it could be done. And the Czechs then followed, and others have followed since, the Swedes. They then responded to the Czechs with economic hammers. This is how they respond. They don't have to invade or any of those things. We are also dependent on Chinese manufacturers, and we are also hopefully dependent on access to the Chinese market, which they guard very jealously. I'll digress here. Read what's happening to Tesla in China today. Anybody familiar with that? You watching that? Tesla wants to sell one Tesla car to 1.4 billion Chinese. I mean, this has been going on since Lord McCartney went to China in 1790. The elusive China market, even Elon Musk fell victim to that. And they are taking his pride and his intellectual property and everything else. This is how they manipulate us. You know, for my friend from Tampa, this is how they get into our medical processes, is they buy people off. And then they don't do the right thing because now, they lose economic benefit. So again, military force is a threat, and it is growing. I'm not denying that. But what the principal threat is economic, and then tech is how they have infiltrated Silicon Valley and other things. This is what winning without fighting looks like, is we just go along stupidly like cattle. We just follow right to the precipice and walk off. So luckily, we've woken up to this threat, and we are aware, and we're doing something about it. So middle income trap, these are all things that they're going to face that no amount of propaganda and no amount of denial, as we saw in Chernobyl, no amount of lies is going to take away the fact that they've got a huge middle income trap problem. They've got a massive demographic problem. I didn't put this up, but in my follow-on funny slides, they just published data that says their population grew from 1.4 billion last year to 1.41 billion this year. It was important that they had that 0.01 addition to that, because they said that only 4,000 people died from the Wuhan virus. The official number of deaths from Wuhan in a country of 1.4 billion was 4,200, something like that. It's total crap. Nobody buys that stuff. But they've started that lie, and they have to continue that lie, and I would like to shine a light on it. Demographics. Their population probably went down because 21 million cell phones went quiet in Wuhan in that period of time. What was that type? Trust. Keith Kroc was the Undersecretary of Economics, Environment, and Energy when I was there. Great human being, Silicon Valley guy. He has realized that our advantages are people trust us. We have credibility. Our businesses, our government, and others are all trustworthy. He realized that the Chinese don't have that. In their own society, they don't have that. In the global sense, they don't have that, because if they've done to Tesla, they've done to everybody that's gone to China. And so Keith Kroc has started trust initiatives, which he calls clean. Clean network, clean path, clean everything, clean labor. So keep an ear out for that. And all that says is, why would you do business with someone you can't trust? Do business with folks you can trust. 5G. Don't buy Huawei 5G because you can't trust it. And then the last thing, if I'd given this brief last year, I would have been kind of hunked over and despondent going, God, it's not going fast enough. It's going fast, man. And the pictures at the end here, we'll get to that. But if you saw the New York Stock Exchange just delisted 3 China telecoms, that is a big deal. There are currently 200 Chinese companies on the New York Stock Exchange, not subject to the same audit requirements U.S. companies are. Why do we give them that advantage? Luckin Coffee, if you want to look at what this looks like, look up Luckin, L-U-C-K-I-N, Luckin Coffee. A complete Ponzi scheme. There was nothing to it. And yet you got American retirement, CalPERS, my military retirement, and others are heavily invested, TSP, in this China market that you can't audit. You can't trust it, so you shouldn't put money into it. And so for the Chinese version of winning without fighting, it targets economic, tech, governance, everything more than our military advantage, because they know they don't have the advantage there, but they have full governance. Up until recently, they have full advantage in those others. So we must adapt to this new threat in terms of a new Cold War. The old Cold War, as Anna mentioned, was their nukes and our nukes, mutually assured destruction, Cuban Missile Crisis, right? It was very tough, and there was a lot of nail biting going on. It's far more complicated than that, and it's going to be much more difficult to resolve. But look, I mean, I say this proudly, we're Americans, we can figure this out. And we have lots of allies who can help us figure it out. So how do we win without fighting? We don't talk about this. We go back to our old habits. You know, we're just a great country and we're going to win. No, it's got to be more, you have to think about it a little bit more than that. We have to compete. Here's what's happened all along. The U.S. has been cooperating with China, thinking that they just understand us. If they come to like us better, they'll become democracies and they'll become liberal economies, right? How has that worked out for us in 40 years? Well, thank goodness I was part of the process that finally pointed out that 40 years it's mosaic, it's biblical, and it's probably a good period to say enough. Let's shift into something more that looks like compete. This doesn't mean that we treat China as an enemy, but where they are undermining our interests, we should then stand up and defend ourselves. So we have to change the conflict paradigm considerably. And I'm really happy to be talking to you all because it talks about things that are non-military. But for the folks out there in TV land, I need you all to start thinking in terms also that are different than what you've grown up with in 20 years in Iraq and Afghanistan. It means thinking more in terms of economic terms. As a military person, thinking in economic terms and education terms and all those others. So we have to, the second bullet there, this is a whole of nation. That's you guys. That's a whole nation effort to think in terms of education. China has completely penetrated our education system. I was mentioning to someone, there's a law that says if there's more than $250,000, if you're accepting as a university more than $250,000 from a foreign source, you have to report it. Grossly underreported. So the Department of Education, a guy named Mick Zase, just put out a notice to all American universities. If you're not reporting this money, we're coming after you. How much money just sort of like, oh, you mean that check? How much came out of that? Well, $6.5 billion without us even trying to hold anybody accountable. It's 10 times that. Has to be. That there is so much Chinese money pumped into our schools and other places on purpose because it works. Winning without fighting. If you buy off the academics and the think tankers, are they going to write horrible things about who you are? Of course not, because the next check is at risk. It's a beautiful system, but until you shine a light on it and they wake up and we start fighting back. Our kids are taught to be herbivores. When I was a kid, we were raised to think critically. We were raised to question assumptions. And I think all of us in this room were raised that way. But in the last 40 years, we've kind of walked away from that because there was no real threat. We didn't care about Pravda or TASS or Svetsia, but by God, you should be concerned about China Global Television Network and Xinhua and all those others that are pumping propaganda into this country through proxies and as for themselves. And then the last thing for my defense folks, we have to work better with other organizations. I just came out of State Department after 35 years in the military. It's definitely, carnivores and herbivores. I mean, you pick an analogy, but we've got to work with these guys. We have to understand them better. Okay, so in terms of defending ourselves in this new Cold War, we've got to harden the economy, and we're starting to do that. We've got to kick these Chinese companies out of the New York Stock Exchange. We have to prevent Chinese government and Communist Party operatives from using economic levers to make us make decisions that don't support. How many business folks here? I'm talking to you. I know that the folks in New York understand that investing in a Chinese company where I really don't understand what that money is or I can't audit it is huge risk. But I still got to make my quarterly, shareholder reports. I got to make my short-term profit numbers without real concern for what happens in 10 years. That puts all of us at enormous risk. And I've had people in business look at me and go, I can't do that. I need the government to make me do it. If you pass a law that says I have to do it, I can, because then the stockholders can't really hold me, can't complain too loudly. So let's get to that point. And finally, on offense, we need to talk to them in a language they understand, and that's force. And I think we did a pretty good job, but it can't stop. We have to keep going. So across the dime, it's not. I've hit this point. It's not military. It's resisting. It's competing. It's not acknowledging the Chinese problem in the econ world, in the diplomatic world. Like I said, I'll have some pictures here, so you don't have to listen to me ramble. DOD's got to be prepared to make some big changes, and OCEA is one, the Office of Commercial and Economic Activity. This is a defense activity in the Pentagon that looks at how China's beating us in the economic world. Defense has lots and lots of resources, a $770 billion budget that you could use to shift away from activities that aren't really high payoff, Iraq and Afghanistan, and into areas that we all recognize are the highest priority threat. DOD has the wherewithal to do that. State has the intellect to do that. Let's join forces and others in the U.S. government. But let's work together as a government instead of as individual agencies to do that. I love this quote. It's about deterrence. And the question is, for my business friends, what does economic deterrence look like? How do we incur costs? How do we put cost on the Chinese for messing with our economic system in the background, for undermining our economic interests, for $200 to $600 billion per year of intellectual property theft over the last 30 years? How do you impose cost in that realm? Let's think about that. How do you deter them from doing that in the future? But that quote, I think, is perfect, because China wants to play this dual game. We're a small, developing, helpless panda country. Don't hurt us, but we're a great power, and you must listen to what we say. I don't want them to be able to play both games. They do that because they say our per capita GDP puts us in the developing country world. Just, no, enough. You're a great. You want to be a great power? Let's play like great powers. So the weak are enabled by their audacity. China's playing this weak, and they can do whatever they want because we're not going to overreact. While us, the strong, are hampered by our scruples. This describes exactly what's been happening all this time. So that's that weak and great power thing. But it's been a very frustrating for a China guy. I'm wearing my Beijing military attaché corps tie to remind me of the bad old days, where I was just told, oh, we don't want to upset the relationship. No, don't. Here's an example. I won't spend too much time on it. The Chinese military attaché here in the U.S., in Washington, D.C., on his cell phone had every DOD phone number. He could call Special Operations Command J5. He could call anybody in DOD, and they would talk to him. You know what I had in Beijing? I had a fax. I would fax them a document, and I saw it in their military headquarters, their Pentagon. It looked to me like the fax machine emptied into the shredder. And that is about how often they actually responded to my request to maybe host the Secretary of Defense. And they kept us at bay that way. I want reciprocity. You want to be treated that way in the U.S., then you're going to treat us that way. Until you do so, we're playing hardball. And we got started down that path. We just can't let up. Anyway, in the last few weeks, it's really gone well. For instance, the G7 that just concluded. We finally spoke up about Xinjiang. You can't kill 1 million of your own people and claim to be, they want to lead the Human Rights Council. You talk about cynical. The groups that are killing Uyghurs and Tibetans and all that are also saying we're the right people to lead the Human Rights Council, or the Intellectual Property Organization, which we defeated, the first win in our UN effort. So G7, we got to leverage allies, partners, and like-mindeds who are equally sick of this, but who have economic dependencies that they're going to have to learn to get over. Cold War. Chinese propaganda system does a great job for us, and I encourage you to read more of it because it's stilted and clunky and all that stuff. But they actually are helping us with targeting. They're going, you're meeting your fellow opponent in the boxing ring, and the ref's reading you the rules, and you go just before you break the fight and touch gloves. You go, hey, I cracked the rib yesterday. Lay off here, okay? Well, guess what? That's all I'm going to do is hit you in that rib. They do that for us here. No way for Washington to replicate Cold War victory. Look what they're showing you there. It's that chessboard slide she showed you. It's Russia and China on the left, and it's all the rest of us going, enough. And so this is a win. They're finally acknowledging we're being effective. A lot of my military friends think of holding terrain in Napoleonic terms, right? You got to hold terrain. I'd say the opposite. I say let them find all the quagmires, all those global quagmires, and get bogged down in them, right? If China wants to put naval forces on the on the west coast of Africa, great, because that's forces we don't have to deal with in the South China Sea and East China Sea. So let's think more strategically about these problems. And that's for you guys out there in seminar land, but again, we're all part of this. And allow them to understand what we learned in the first Cold War about strategic overreach. And then credibility. This great poster, of the great leader giving direction. The Chinese, one of their favorite destinations for travel in the past was North Korea. Imagine that, especially the guys our age. Why would they go to North Korea? Because they saw how weird it was in China 30 years ago during the Cultural Revolution, and they would go to North Korea to witness that again. This is from 1961 during the Great Leap Forward, when 36 million Chinese people starved to death, even though there was plenty of food being grown. 36 million Chinese were starved. When they asked Mao Zedong, aren't you concerned about this? His answer was, we have a population problem anyway. So when I see pictures like this, I go, this is victory. They're saying we got no food problem after COVID and all that stuff. They got huge food problems they're going to have to deal with in the next 6 months. Do we want to starve out the Chinese people? No. It's not the people, it's the party. And we're smart enough to manage that. We talked about access to our economy and our technology. Deny them easy access. And we can do that through universities, showing where the money's at, making them come clean. Confucius Institutes, Troy University here in the great state of Alabama is actually proud that it's going to maintain its Confucius Institute, which is directly managed by the Communist Party of China to undermine democracies. That is their charter. And yet Troy University wants to continue doing that. It's fine, I say. You can have your Confucius Institute. Just publish your memorandum of understanding where I can read it. Because I guarantee it says things you don't want seen in public. It has to do with money and other things, and corruption. Deny them that access. The top there, the Chinese visa holder pleads guilty to exporting U.S. mint. Every week you're seeing these. FBI is finally on the case, and they're actually looking and prosecuting. Critical thinking. Again, I spoke to one of you here about that in the great state of Knob Noster, city of Knob Noster. We have to get back to question all assumptions. Question them all, because China is really good at this. This is one of their strengths, is lying, right? It's all lies. Every lie incurs the death of the truth. So the title of this one says, the onus is on the United States to avoid another Cold War. They've been conducting Cold War against us since 1949. And they're just saying, but you guys don't fight because that would be bad. No, see through that and take action. And I love this one. We started this one after after Secretary Pompeo declared genocide in Xinjiang. Why would you hold the Olympics in a country that's actually killing millions of its own people or committing genocide? And now the Chinese press is actually picking this up and they're going, we're confident the Olympics are going to go off well. Good. They're talking about things we want them to talk about. They are reacting to us. All these things make me really happy. I'm probably putting you to sleep, but 4 years ago, none of this would have come to light. This is absolute tone deaf. So we look at in the information space, as far as information warfare, they have surrounded themselves with the great firewall, right, of China. Meaning I can't get my messages into the Chinese people. They do a really good job. Now the Chinese people are smart enough to pole vault, but there's a risk involved with that. Your social credit score goes down if you go to the wrong sites, et cetera. So they have managed to block real world information away from their own people. But it also accrues to their own, their wonks, their party operatives. And so this was a tweet they put out that says, here's China lighting a fire, putting our own International Space Station on orbit, and here's India lighting a fire, as they see 400,000 infections a day of the China virus, the Wuhan virus, making them sick. The gall. You made India sick, and now you're laughing at them. Anyway, so India did not respond well to this. You know the outcome of this? The Quad. Japan, Australia, India, U.S. is an actual functioning organization now. And you look at where those countries lie in China's periphery, that is not lost on them. And so this is an action-reaction thing. You've done this to yourselves. But, I mean, can you imagine that? Mocking India for its problems it's having with people dying. Totally tone deaf.
What's that word, sir?
Schadenfreude? Oh, Schadenfreude, yeah. The German word for taking pleasure in the harm, the damage to other people. So a guy loses his house, and you're like going, laughing at him. Back to India. As they were realizing that we were going to actually blame them for COVID, because it did originate in the Wuhan Virology Lab, I promise you, I sent you that read ahead. If you haven't read it, you might want to, Nicholas Wade. They tried blaming us. They tried blaming everybody else. We know they're at fault. And they're trying to blame India for this as they suffer for it. This is going to backfire. Okay, so conclusion. We are done admiring the problem, and we are finally starting to act. We need your support. You need to talk to your Congress members and all them who are actually on board. One of my favorite activities was go brief Congress on this, because left or right, Republican, Democrat, they were all supportive, saying, can you go faster? Can you do more? It's not the PLA Air Force. It's part of it, but we need to think more. This is the head-up display from an F-16. That's what I did. That's what Rock did, right? When you think about warfare, I think about that. No. You need to think about information war, economic war, technological war. I talked about what winning without fighting means, and that it's not that. Manipulating our population through information. We have yet to solve that, and we need your help. And it starts at your school boards and elsewhere. And if you look at what's gone on here in the recent past, in the last 8 months or so, with the election and all that stuff, if you don't think there's Chinese active manipulation and funding going into all these things that are happening, you're not reading. They like this. This goes back to the original phrase, winning without fighting, from Sun Tzu. During the Warring States period, 500 BC, is to send in spies to create discord and dissent and anger inside the opponent's country, so they're fighting each other, and you just walk in and take over. They're doing exactly that here. We got to stop them. I'll let you guys ask questions. Taiwan, I just quickly note that strategic ambiguity has gotten us here in the last 40 years. Basically saying, we are, unlike we did in Korea, where we drew a line that excluded Korea, which then told North Korea, go ahead and invade. China was supporting North Korea in that, by the way, in 1950. If you're too clear on your red lines, you know that the other side is going to then challenge you on the things that are not inside that red line. So strategic ambiguity has done us quite well. There are those who are saying it's getting tense enough now where we have to be more clear on what our red lines are. There's merit to that argument, but if whatever we do, we need to do it thoughtfully. We can't do it knee-jerk. Finally, to my U.S. government folks out there in TV land, you are way too slow. Coordinating is good, but your secretaries have authorities. They should act on those, but they can't wait for the NSC to give you the answer. It takes too long. We have a lot of strengths we have yet to exploit, and we got to get a whole-of-nation effort, because that's the challenge in the new Cold War. It's not military only. It's whole-of-nation, and we have to respond. And then everything that's going on today, everything that's gone bad in the last year and a half is traceable to the PRC's failure to deal with a pandemic that they created, they denied, covered up. There is consideration they possibly intentionally allowed it to leave the country with the thought that it's going to hurt us. We're not the only ones going down with this ship. I'm not saying that is the answer. I don't have any evidence to that. Very consistent with they handled these things in the past. But we got to stop fighting each other, and we got to focus on the real problem. And this is the end. This picture makes me so happy, and I hope you all get the same joy from this picture. Look at the Navy skipper, a commander, an 05 lieutenant colonel. He's got his feet up. He's outside. He's cruising. That's China's greatest weapon. They love this. I started with a carrier. I'm ending with a carrier. That's the carrier that they're talking about. And look at his attitude and his body language. Yeah, it may have been posed, but this is cognitive warfare. This is what they've been doing to us all along. We are finally doing it to them. When the Chinese people see this picture and they're going, this dude is clearly not afraid of our carrier. Oh, man. And they responded. The government responded loud and clear on this one. They hated this picture. This is winning. And with that, thank you for your attention. Questions?
We've got 20 minutes for questions. Shall we go with the gentleman in the shirt at the right of the corner? Because I know you tried to ask a question in the previous session.
The loud shirt? No.
That's an Aloha shirt. What are you
It's a
talking about?
fantastic
It is.
shirt.
LL Bean aloha shirt. Mike Kasperzak from Silicon Valley. I've done a lot of Friendship City stuff in China, all over the country. How do we turn that program of theirs to our advantage?
Yeah, but it's simply informing people before they go of what's going to happen. These things, if the first time you encounter Chinese tactics, first time I encountered a negotiation with the Chinese, they took my lunch and my lunch money, my pride. I didn't. The second time, I noticed they're doing the exact same thing they did last time. And here's how it goes. They initially bid with me on what I want, and then I say no, and then they go run over to my boss. And then they say, hey, Stilwell's being a jackass. And so before I start my negotiation, I tell my boss, don't listen to them. Ignore them. Let me do the negotiation. That takes it off the table. And then they run the clock out. They wait to the last minute, and then when it comes, they say, oh, we can't do it because there's no time, because they ran the clock out. What I'm saying is, for all of you going to China with sister city arrangements and all that stuff, go. Take their money and ask for more. Look, they're going to say you have to fly yourself out there. Go, it's bufang bian. That's it. Business class. I want to go business class and all that stuff. Make them negotiate for this. And then when you come back, just say, yeah, it was interesting. And here's all the things I saw that I didn't like. But you got to be pre-trained. You have to be, you have to take a preparatory brief before you go, so you can see it coming. You go, wow, those dudes are right. And then take advantage of it. Oh, yeah, abuse it. Oh, go ahead.
Salmon pink shirt, delicious.
Yes, only real men wear pink shirts.
Yes, I do.
Brett Mockley from Minneapolis. I enjoyed your coverage on this. Can you elaborate more on what we do know about the COVID-19 and the Wuhan lab?
I would, but I would just push it to the. Did you get the read aheads? Did we send the links?
If they were sent out.
Yeah, a guy named Nicholas Wade from New York Times, science writer, completely unimpeachable. I mean, a lot of these times when I was saying it, President Trump said this in April last year. We have very good evidence, which we did, that this thing came out of the Wuhan lab. Secretary Pompeo followed up the next day and says, yes, we've got tons of evidence. Very little of that evidence was classified, frankly. I have reams of paper that I handed to the New York Times, to the Washington Post, to Wall Street Journal. Anybody that would listen, I would hand this paper. I go, all you have to do is read this stuff. And they're doing gain-of-function testing in the Wuhan lab, assisted by the National Institute of Health, Tony Fauci, Peter Daszak, and a bunch of Americans who should have known better, which is why you've got Peter Daszak, an American, saying it couldn't have possibly been the lab. There's got to be consequences for this. He was wrong. This is actually what I started a process I hope maybe some of you can help me with. It's called the Pundit Scorecard. I want to take these pundits like Peter Daszak and others, and the 90 scientists who signed a Lancet article back in last February that said, couldn't possibly have been that. We are all virologists. No chance it was virology lab. And make them own that. You says, I'm betting my reputation on this. By God, you're going to pay for that. I think we have to do that. If you saw Marsha Blackburn's interaction with a guy named Colin Call, who was trying to confirm for a Pentagon position, he's out of Stanford. She actually pulled up all of his dire Twitter predictions. If you kill Soleimani, the Middle East is going to erupt in flames. And she says, did it erupt in flames, Mr. Call? Well, the sun was in my eyes. And then he said, if you move the embassy to Jerusalem, it's going to erupt in flames. Mr. Call, what happened? Well, but the point is, if you got to go back to what people are saying, what these pundits are saying, and ask why they're saying those things. In many cases, in academia and other places, they're saying it for the wrong reasons. There's money interests, and we can't. Look, I want academics to be pure academics. That's all I ask. But yes, virology lab.
Gentleman in the check shirt.
Thanks. Eric Drucker from St. Louis, Missouri. Loved your talk. I work in the field of artificial intelligence, and similar to how gasoline fuels an engine, data fuels the models that we've trained. Yeah. And one of the disadvantages that we face as a country is we have civil liberties and, core beliefs that limit the type of data that we collect on our citizenship. China has none of those limitations and wantonly collects massive amounts of data. What we're seeing, however, is that their ability to collect that data, which goes against our values, is allowing them to advance further than us in very specific areas of that field that give them a rare opportunity to innovate ahead of us. And we see this in them winning data science competitions, models in computer vision outperforming ours. I just was wondering if you had any thoughts on things that we can be doing as a country to try and preserve or retain, in some cases, our lead in that field.
Well, here's what we can't do. We can't become them. We cannot abandon who we are, our values. And so, as Churchill said, gentlemen, we are out of money. We shall have to think. There are lots of people thinking about this right now. Elsa Kania, Kania, out of CNAS in D.C., has spent a lot of effort on this. And I agree with you. We have put one hand behind our back, right? We are hampered by our scruples. And that's just the way it is. Look, there are some very smart folks in Silicon Valley who are thinking about this as well. We can outthink them. We can do this. But you're right. We may end up, I'll tell you what, we have to harden, at the very basic level, we have to harden our people. And then we have to harden our companies. And we have to do all those other things to allow them from becoming participants, willing participants in this data sharing exercise. But I'm a dumb fighter pilot. I can drop a bomb. I don't know anything. I can say AI. But look, the big picture answer to this is we can't become them.
Got a question from the third row. I'll come back to you next.
Yes, sir. John Thurman, one more time. In the first question that you asked, sir, you said how many business people are in the room. And then late in your speech, you said go out and participate in your school board. That's where we're missing this ballgame. We're not reaching the business person. Everybody is listening to CNN and all the wonderful organizations we call the mainstream press, and yet we're allowing ourselves to be propagandized by all these people. And yet you got 70 people here today. Would you challenge us all to go out and get involved?
Will you? I can't do it. But I'm doing it in Hawaii. I'm actually meeting with the educators here in Alabama tonight, and it becomes proselytization. All you have to do is convince people of this, and it has to be critical thinking. To me, there's other answers, but there's actually a lot of activity going on in this regard. To again, I showed you a couple examples of propaganda, right? The U.S. is starting a Cold War. So many of us actually buy that just wholesale, right? Because we trust each other. This is a big difference between our system and theirs. We trust each other. I don't know any of you. I have told you things that you could go to the Washington Post or whatever and cause me some embarrassment. And yet I trust you until you prove untrustworthy. It's the opposite in China. They absolutely don't trust each other. If you've been there, you've seen it firsthand. Their military doesn't trust each other. That's beautiful. One of the solutions here is to get faster, we need to delegate more. Delegation implies trust. It means that my subordinate, I trust, is not going to drop the ball here. And if he does, I'm going to fire him. But they know that they're being empowered and they will go do. They don't have that in China, which is why they're so slow. We have to take advantage of that. So there's a lot of stuff we can talk about this. But anyway.
So you've been waiting very patiently in the second row.
Thank you. Klaus Weisworm. A businessman. I'm a manufacturer, and we've had intellectual property stolen from the Chinese. A lot of what I look at coming from the Chinese is what I refer to as currency manipulation. They're selling steel to us at less than we produce it internally because it's government subsidized. The only way to do that and fix that problem is not to buy that product from them. Secondly, my question goes to Taiwan and my concern for what our posturing and our positions are militarily as well as diplomatically, that Taiwan doesn't become Crimea 2.0.
I'll go Taiwan first. Hong Kong solved that for us, I believe. Taiwan, in the 2018 elections, the KMT, the Kuomintang, the Let's Make Friends with China party, won in local elections. And people were like going, oh, man, is this the beginning of the end? Well, then in 2019, we had the protests, like for the entire summer in Hong Kong, and a heavy-handed Chinese response. And then in 2020, China passed the national security law, which says, any of you who has tweeted anything like Daryl Morey from the Houston Rockets that says, I stand with the people of Hong Kong, the national security law says it's extraterritorial. It says that if you go to China and you tweeted anything along the lines that the Chinese Communist Party didn't like, you are subject to arrest and imprisonment for life. That's what it says. And so I'm never going back. Never. Never go back. You could become the two Michaels who have been held for 2+ years there for the crime of coming from Canada because Canadians arrested Meng Wanzhou. Taiwan in 2020, the DPP, Taiwan, won a landslide. So Chinese actions in 2019 and 2020 resulted in them losing Taiwan forever. We were concerned that Taiwan was actually going to make a deal, right? Because it's very enticing. And the Chinese swan song or siren song says, we will treat you lovingly. We'll be nice to you. We know that's not true. So there's been a couple things recently that have made sure that Taiwan won't be a problem. Another one for my tech friends is TSMC, the highest end chip manufacturer, 5 nanometer, that's all I know, is now going to set up shop in Arizona. Right? We're trying to bring industry to the U.S. They were thinking about setting that shop up in China. That's a win. And so we're okay. I think we're doing okay there. Your first question was?
Their methods being currency manipulated.
Yeah. Tariffs got to that to a degree. Tariffs are not the right answer, but it was the only thing we could do. So we did that. One thing that's worked is you appeal to the consumer's sense of fair play, and that is human rights. And so when you see a shipping container full of human hair, do you see this about a year ago? A shipping container full of Uyghur hair that they had cut off of the millions that they imprisoned in their vocational training camps, and were selling to American, beauty shops. When it came out how that stuff was taken, American customer says, we don't want that. And that stuff is not going to sell in American stores. Nike shoes now are being built or made with Uyghur slave labor. Of course, they have a labor advantage there, right? Because they don't have to pay their guys. It's free labor. Americans and Westerners do have a sense of fair play, but we've got to get to that. We have to show that if you buy that, you support this. And I do think American consumers will pay more money to avoid that. Now, steel, that goes to industry. That's a different animal. Maybe there is some social considerations in the manufacturing world. I don't know.
I guess that has to be your own moral compass.
And embarrassment, potential embarrassment if you do that.
We'll go here, then I'll come to my J-Whiz legend later.
Jim, thanks so much for that presentation. Mark Lillis over in California. So we heard yesterday on the space side that because of bureaucracy, that a satellite was taking what could take 5 years on DoD side was taking 4 months in industry. How much is bureaucracy playing into this factor within our own military and the slow pace that bureaucracy sometimes causes, and our kind of winning this match here with China?
Well, I'm part of that problem. I help. You guys do POM? Anybody develop the Program Objective Memorandum? Yeah, look, DoD develops cutting edge stuff. That's what they do, as did NASA during the space program. There's a balance between too much oversight, where the F-22 takes 20 years to roll out. By then, it's obsolete. And missing important steps and coming up with something that was supposed to do work and it doesn't. We opted toward the more conservative. The beautiful thing, a friend of mine works at SpaceX, so I got to go through that factory on the way out here back in January. Amazing, right? Industry has, and Elon Musk has sufficiently deep pockets that he can afford to crash 3 or 4 of those, boosters and laugh about it. And yet it worked, and now he can get that thing to re-enter and all, safely without burning too much fuel. I do see, and you're seeing this as well, a shift away from this heavily government-involved procurement system into something that looks more commercial. A lot of times commercial opportunities aren't that many, so competition's a problem. But it's got to be better than what it is. It's too slow. I mean, technologically, we're shooting behind our target. And then we go help the Chinese with hyper velocity weapons and stealth. We actually were trying to help them along with people believing they might actually become our friends. And they can turn that stuff like that because they've got government support, they don't have oversight, et cetera. You're right, it's a huge problem. And we're going to have to, I think, depend more on the commercial world to address at least some of it.
Good morning, and thanks for your presentation. It's very interesting. I just have a question kind of on the social side, demographic side. About, let's say 25 years ago, my wife and I were we adopted both of our daughters, and for a while we had considered international adoption, and we were told Chinese girls were readily adoptable because they limited the size of allowable families to one boy over there. Is that true? And how has that affected them on the world stage?
What's his name? Chen Guangcheng, a blind lawyer activist in China in 2012. His wife had their first child, and she was forcibly sterilized. It may not have been his wife, it may have been a friend, but the woman was forcibly sterilized without her consent after the pregnancy. They had a girl. They wanted a boy. In this culture, boys continue the family line and all that stuff. And so you're right. And the numbers are around 70 million is the delta right now of boys and girls in the PRC. There are just a lot more girls and boys, a lot more boys and girls because they have adopted out entire generations of their children. But it points to a bigger demographic question, which they have to face right now. They've actually loosened up the one-child policy because a population pyramid looks like this. In China, seriously, it looks like this. One child is supporting 2 sets of parents and 4 sets of grandparents. Retirement programs fall apart. Health care falls apart. It all falls apart, and they now are realizing it. But the great thing about communist authoritarian systems is they get it wrong all the time. They get everything wrong. In 1965 or something like that, Mao Zedong took a dislike to birds in China. He decided that birds were eating all the grain, and that food should have gone into the bellies of Chinese people. And so they come a campaign, Kill the Birds campaign. And you've got all these beautiful videos of families out there with their pots and pans and spoons. Every time a bird would land, they would just go next to it and bang, 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 and make it fly until it was just so exhausted it couldn't get up, and they'd crush its head. And you got these videos of these deuce-and-a-halfs full of dead birds. This is a Chinese authoritarian solution to these birds eating all the food. What a great idea, right? Until the insects took over. The birds were eating all the insects. Well, now you got locusts, and the plague. This is the problem with authoritarianism. And when you start messing around with demographics like that, they are reaping the rewards from that, and it's unrecoverable. They're making a big deal about their census right now to say it's not going down. If their population is actually decreasing, they're not ready for that. And it causes huge problems, and they'll be blamed.
Okay, time for one last question.
So many good questions. Reforming a question every 30 seconds here. Thank you for your time today. My question is, I understand everything we're saying on how we should approach a new style war with China on getting them to take us seriously. I understand everything we're saying on how we should hold them accountable economically, financially, and in our IT and intellectual property areas. But do we have to back off from an extremely strict America First manufacturing policy to expanding our trade relationships around the Pacific and fair labor but lower cost of labor economies to start bringing in materials that don't, I'm having a problem putting this together. It feels like every Black Friday we seem to abdicate our war or our progress against China and then give them all of our treasure back every holiday. How do we expand our influence amongst our trading partners to get the low-cost trinkets back in for our Christmases and our birthdays and our holidays without giving that back up to China every fall?
So it was already happening. Labor costs, as many of you know, in China have been going up considerably as people's expectations of standard living have been going up. Well, you offset that with slave labor, Uyghurs. That sort of helps. It doesn't help the shoe manufacturers in Guangzhou, though. And those people are no longer working in shoe factories in Guangzhou making those things because they've been priced out of the market, and they're going back to the farms in China. So there's step one. It's going to happen naturally. I think economics says that these things will naturally gravitate to the areas of lowest labor costs. 2, I went looking for a bicycle. Has anybody looked for a bicycle since the pandemic started? There's none to be had because people are actually focusing on kind of important things. I love cycling. Anyway, I just stopped by a Trek store and looked at bicycles, and I was looking for the made in China. For a time there, every bicycle that was less than $2,000 that you bought in the U.S. was made in one factory in Guangzhou. Didn't matter what brand it was. They were all made in the same factory. One was made in Vietnam, the other was made in Cambodia. So these things are now migrating into the areas of lower labor cost. Indonesia is a huge opportunity. India is a massive opportunity if they can get out from under their own bureaucracy to make these things happen. So I do think we do have to consciously take steps, but I think this is happening already. But again, we have to not fall back to our old habits. The problem is when you go to Vietnam to make something, they don't have that same one-stop shopping that you can get when you go down south in Shenzhen. And you want a widget, and they go, well, Bob makes widgets, and and it comes out quick and fast and generally high quality. It's not there in these other places, so American industry needs to get with these folks and help them do that. And that's something we do very well. Chinese industry, when they go to Malaysia and other places that I went, they bring in their own workers. They don't train the Malaysians. You know what we do? Hewlett-Packard trains the Malaysians. They send them back to the U.S. for technical training, leadership training, and all those things. This is an advantage that you, the American business folks, bring, and we should take advantage of and talk about. That's what we do.
So before I hand over to Klinger, I just want to say a massive thank you to General Stilwell for giving us a fantastic insight based on 35 years of experience and knowledge on China, which is undoubtedly the main effort for the Western world. Sir, thank you.
And thank you, Shieldsy. Okay, we've got a quick break. Please feel free to grab your lunch. Remember, you've got your badge. Your lunch number is on there. Also, check your flight information out at the table at Mr. Thurman. If I can see you before you split, I'd appreciate that. And otherwise, enjoy seminar.